G'day guys, it's Bruce here again. I've finally decided that we'll make a video around the tracking devices that I've installed on my bikes and let you know how all that went. It's been quite an interesting experiment. It began at probably a good couple of months back now, and ended up with 2 devices actually in the end. But the long and the short of it is that it's not quite what I expected, as I'll explain very shortly. So the idea was that I wanted to have a tracking device, as others have spoken about, and I wanted something that I could install on my bike so that if my bike was pinched, that I could potentially recover my bike. So that was basically the idea behind this. I wanted something that I could track in live time. So, you know, from the moment it went missing, that I could actually track the bike via my cell phone or via a computer. I also wanted something that worked on 3G and the 4G networks. I wanted something that worked with GPRS, so if there were no 3G and 4G networks available, that it would still continue to track, and once it got back into a reception area, it would be able to send the coordinates of the bike back to me. They were the kind of main things that I was thinking of in my head that I needed for a tracking device that would make it, well, I guess, useful. So yeah, so that's so I mean, tracking devices, all this stuff, this was all kind of new to me, as it's probably new to a lot of you guys, and so I really had no idea what to expect. So from a tracking device, so what I did is I did a whole bunch of research online, tried to figure out what was good. It seems like there's quite a lot of tracking devices around, and there were a lot of different price ranges. Some of them start for as little as sort of like $30 to $50 for a very cheap device, and you can go up to, you know, a couple of $100 or even up to $500 for a what supposedly would be a premium device. I decided to sit somewhere in the middle. I chose a device that was around that $170 mark, and that was the kind of money that I wanted to spend on a device. Okay, so this is a unit. The units take SIM cards, which sit into the inside of here. You just push a SIM card in there. So typically you'd use a prepaid SIM with this. Ideally you want data, and you need to be able to text this unit as well. That's the other thing that you need to be able to do. So you can configure it, and you also want to be able to text it so that you can get data back from it as well. So basically with this unit, you buy yourself a SIM. We're in a really terrible reception area here, so it's quite a problem. Like, we basically get Telstra here, and that's all we get. We get about 1 bar of reception of 4G if we're lucky, and I have to run a Wi-Fi repeater in order to be able to get reception. So this is a really good test area, because a lot of areas in Australia are like this. They're just terrible reception. So we wanted to be sure that the thing could work in an area of terrible reception. Now with a Telstra 4G card and or Telstra SIM in here, this can work even in this area. Even inside, it will still track, and I could still contact it. But I did try with a MASIM, which is a much cheaper cell phone carrier, and with that I had problems. I could not connect to the unit until the device was actually outside in the open and basically in the car wandering around, and then I could connect to it, but I couldn't initially connect to it or configure it, which made it difficult. So that's the unit. So you get the unit, and then you get the wiring that comes with the unit. So the wiring that comes with the unit is this wiring harness here with 4 wires in it. So you have a positive, a negative, a yellow and an orange, and the yellow triggers the yellow can be used to trigger anything remote, but in this case it's triggering a relay, which would trigger your fuel pump, so you can turn your fuel pump on and off remotely. And the orange, I'm trying to remember what we used. Orange was accessory. So what happens with the orange is this would typically be wired to something that's not already on, and the positive and negative will obviously be wired to your battery directly all of the time. So technically the unit's on all of the time, but the unit knows when it comes alive via the ignition, via the accessory, which is the orange cord here. So I made this wiring harness. I wired it up so I could run some tests with it. I had a bulb in here, which would, you know, be a proxy for the fuel pump. And the idea with having the proxy for the fuel pump is that what I could do is I could trigger the relay, and I could see when the thing was turning on and off, and whether I was actually able to trigger it remotely and things like that in various circumstances. So that's basically what I was doing with this. And then I ran it on an external battery. So the external battery I ran it on was this battery here. This is I think a 7 ampere hour battery. Yeah, 12 volt 7 ampere hour battery, which I ran it on. And I'm probably going to experiment actually a little bit further with this with the actual motorbike battery itself. So the actual motorbike battery itself is a 8.6 ampere hour battery, and it's a slightly bigger battery. Now, what I wanted to be able to do with this is I wanted to be able to basically hook the thing up, and I wanted to be able to test it on my bench and see actually how it performed. Now, the other thing that I did get with this is I got this battery pack. Now, the units by themselves do actually have a little bit of battery in them. They have a tiny little battery in them, but the problem is that the battery that's internal on these things does not last very long. It might last about maybe half an hour, probably half an hour, I reckon, at the most. Maybe depending on how you have it set up, maybe it'll last a little bit longer, but I've found around about half an hour, the internal battery. So you really need an external battery, because what can happen when someone decides to steal your bike is they could get under your seat, and it's very common for this to happen, for them to lift your seat and disconnect the main battery. And so they'll disconnect the battery in case an alarm's hooked up or anything extra is hooked up, so they can disable those things. So you really have to have an external battery, because once the battery is disconnected in your bike, you would not be able to track it anymore. You wouldn't be able to track it for long enough. And you might not notice it's missing straight away. That's the other problem. So you really need to have an external battery connected into the unit. So this unit had 2 extra wires. One of them was for, I think, some sort of touch SOS switch, and the other one was for the battery. And you could use either one or the other, and I decided to opt for the battery option. So this is the battery pack, and that battery pack would plug into this wire here, and you plug the two together, and then you could power the unit independently via the rechargeable lithium-ion battery. And that's the same wire that could also be used to do other things, but typically in a bike application you'd want a battery on it. That's all you'd really use. The other wire, don't worry about that, because that's for something that's not even relevant to bikes, but it could be more relevant to cars or other types of tracking, but it's not relevant to anything we would do on a motorbike. So overall the unit is fairly simple. It's not complicated. It's not complicated to hook up. Now what happened, the problem that I had was I hooked this thing up, and I hooked it up in the evening, and I was testing, experimenting with it, and trying to connect to it, and trying to configure it to my SIM provider. And it just took me ages to get that figured out and to get it actually working properly. I had a lot of problems. It took me hours to sort it out, because the manual this thing comes with, it's typical Chinglish, and really just hard to follow. So most of the workout was sort of me contacting the supplier, getting information back from the supplier, reading through their manuals, and which actually when I first got sent the unit I didn't even get the manuals, so later on I got the manuals, and I was reading through the manuals and trying to figure out the thing myself. So it took quite a bit of time to get it figured out, and then I went to bed, and the next morning I get up and I find that the battery's flat. So I thought to myself, well, that's a bit odd. It's a bit odd that I've got, a 7 amp hour battery, and the 7 amp hour battery has only been on for one night, and it's already flat the next morning. So I was a little bit concerned about that, and I was pretty sure that I charged the thing fully. So what I did is I charged the battery again to full, set it up again, and then did another test, and I found that I got about 2 days the second time around about 2 days use out of that battery with absolutely nothing else connected to the battery. So I started to get concerned. I started to get concerned that the battery seemed to be getting consumed pretty quickly with really just a tracker hooked up to it. So then I started doing some research, and I started to find that this seemed to be a fairly common problem with tracking devices, that when you left a lot of people were complaining, not so much in motorbikes, but in cars or four-wheel drives, where they had a device or a caravan or something, they had a tracker set up, they'd leave it for months, and then they would come back and they would find that the battery was flat, completely flat. They couldn't start the four-wheel drive, or the caravan battery was completely flat. So then I started to, sort of experiment a little bit more, and I thought, okay, well, what I'll do is I've got a lithium-ion battery, which I'll show you shortly, in my bike, and I thought, well, I'll actually hook the thing up in my bike, I'll do some tests, I'll go for some rides, we'll see what the tracking's like and things like that, and see, how useful that side of it is. So that was my next plan. So that's what I did. I hooked the thing up in my bike, and I found, again, like the same thing happened. So I had it hooked up, overnight. Next day, go to start my bike, wouldn't start, just couldn't turn the bike over, not enough charge left in the battery. So that was really frustrating. So back to the drawing board, charge the battery again, get it charged, play around with because there's a few different modes in these units, so you can have what we call full-time tracking, which is how I had it set. So I was thinking, oh, well, maybe it's the full-time tracking that's consuming all the power. So So what I'll do is I'll set it to, they have like like 3 different modes. So there's like a full power tracking, which is full on tracking all of the time. Then there's tracking when the bike's moved or when it's being operated, which only triggers when the accessory happenings. And then there's what they call hibernation mode. So I tried both of those modes. I experimented with both of those modes, and both of them really didn't make much difference. I would get a day and a half out of my battery, and after that it's just completely flat. So so then I started doing tests. I started putting my multimeter on the unit and testing and seeing how much current was actually being drawn. And what I found was that with the unit in most of the modes, you were drawing about 0.25 of an amp or a quarter of an amp. And once you had the battery attached to it, it was drawing half an amp, which is quite a bit, you know. Like 0.5 of an amp is a fair bit, a fairly hefty, chunky draw on a small battery, because a motorbike's only got a small battery, you know, 7 ampere hours or whatever is not much. It's not like a car battery where it might last a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So that was a big problem, and I still have not solved that problem, and I don't think it's solvable. I think actually that the best you could hope for would probably be to get maybe 4 or 5 days out of if you weren't riding your bike every day. The most you could hope to get out of the track would probably be 4 or 5 days, maybe at the very tops. And you'd have to not have an external battery hooked up to the thing. As soon as you hook that external battery up to it, it's going to drain your battery really quickly. So the external battery is definitely part of the problem, a big part of the problem. And these units, unfortunately, this is from a pretty big manufacturer that I got these units. They make a lot of different tracking devices, and apparently this is very, very common. Now, one of the things that I should lay out is that this device can track, you know, and I did say before, in 3G, 4G, GPRS, and what it can do is it can log things while it's out of a network range. When it comes back into a network range, it can upload that data. It also has Geo Fencing and a whole bunch of other stuff, the fuel pump cutoff and other things that you can connect up. So someone potentially stole your bike. Movement sensors, NOx sensors and all that kind of stuff. I found the NOx sensors and things on the bike, it was forever saying I'd crashed. Like every time I rode out of here and rode over a bump on the road, maybe because the bike's suspension's fairly hard, it didn't like it. It spat the dummy, and it spat the dummy a lot of times on that kind of stuff, and kept saying that I'd had a crash or the warning crash, warning vibration, and it didn't seem to matter how I set those settings. I could never set them, desensitize them enough for it to be worth it. I found with the Geo Fencing, like I had the Geo Fencing set down to I think about 5 meters at one point. I tried 5 meters, 10 meters, 15 meters, and the idea was that if it got moved from my garage, it would start ringing my phone and give me an alert and telling me. That stuff's not super accurate where I am, and the reason it's not super accurate is because we just don't have good enough. We don't have a good enough 4G reception here for that to be good. For these things to track really accurately and to be able to tell you really accurately where a device is or where something is, you need to have really, really good cell phone coverage. If you don't have good cell phone coverage, you're not going to get that level of accuracy. You might get accuracy within 15 meters, say, for example. And if you're in a really bad area, you might not even know where the thing is at all. So this brings me to the other problem. And the other problem, of course, is that these devices can be jammed. So anything that runs on a GPRS type style network, because of the way that it works, it has two problems. So one is that it's heavy on battery because of the way it actually has to keep communicating with cell phone towers that are around in order to be able to get the positioning, and it's doing that, you know, regularly, like really regularly, unless it's in hibernation mode. And then the second problem is that it can be jammed. So what can happen is if a thief is onto it, and some of them are, not all of them, obviously, you know, if you get your odd crackhead that's stealing bikes, they're probably not onto it, but there are people around that are onto it that steal bikes, and what they can do is they can pretty quickly for, you know, $10-15, certainly for $50 they can buy a GPRS jammer. And so what they can do is they can put a jammer beside the bike, or they could get an RS detector, and they could detect where the RS signal is coming from. And if you haven't hidden the detector, haven't hidden the transmitter while on your bike, they could find it, they could unplug it. So there's a whole bunch of problems with this that really, in my opinion, just make this really just not really worth the effort. It just really isn't worth it. I don't really think it's worth it. I think it can be overcome too easily. I think there are circumstances where this works okay. It's probably better than nothing. I've heard of people having their bikes stolen, and because they've had a tracker, being able to get their bikes back. But I think if anyone who kind of half knows what they're doing, they're going to steal a bike, they're going to put it in a container. You're not going to be able to track your bike once it's in a container. You're not going to be able to track your bike if it's in an underground car park. There's lots of situations where the bike just simply cannot be tracked and cannot be found. and ultimately if they're dismantling the bikes, they're soon going to find the tracker, and that's the other problem. So now what I'll do is I'll show you I'll show you how your installation should be done if you do choose to do this. So okay, so this is underneath my bike seat. We obviously have my battery and my fuse box. Now the thing is, what most people are probably going to do when they hook this thing up is they're probably just going to hook it up, and they're going to hook it up to the positive and negative on the batteries, and it's going to be fairly obvious that something's been hooked up on here. On my bike I chose not to do it that way because I really wanted a stealthy install, and this is the way you should install it, is you should really make it quite stealthy. So you really need to hack into your wiring loom somewhere, and you need to hook the thing into your wiring loom. It needs to look standard. It can't look like the wiring loom's been hacked into. If it looks like it's been hacked into, then someone can get a pair of wire snips, and they can soon start snipping the wires away to anything extra like an alarm or anything that's added to your bike. So you really have to hide it quite well. The other thing that a lot of people will do is they put things under their seats. So if I go under my seat cowl here and we look in the back of here, there's really nothing in here. Like the wiring's just, it's just no wiring in here. There's just nothing in here. So if you hide your tracking device under your seat, it's quite easy for a thief to remove this cover and to get in here. And a lot of them do. They will get in there and they will have a look, because sometimes they get in there and they look in here, see if there's a spare key, because sometimes people keep the spare keys in the back of the bike, and it's quite common for a spare key to be hidden in here somewhere and a thief to find it and use it to start your bike. So not a good place to put a key, not a good place to put a tracker. It's certainly on the don't do list. Yeah, so basically when you set it up in your bike, as I've shown you there, it really has to be quite stealthy. I'm not going to show you where I put the tracker on my bike, or the wiring back to it, because the wiring is fairly simple, and I don't want people to know where the tracker is on my bike anyway. So just the same as you shouldn't be showing people where you put a tracker on your bike. But it's well hidden on my bike. It's not easy to find. You won't find it easily. And someone even that was looking for it would struggle to find the tracker on this bike. It would not be easy to find. It certainly wouldn't be easy to remove. And it wouldn't be easy to find out where I've wired it in either, because I spent a fair bit of time wiring this thing in to make sure that it couldn't be found, and it would be very difficult to see where it was. I'll show you some tracking action. I've got some tracking that we played with, so I'll show you how the app works. The app is, it's okay. It's good enough to tell you where your device is, or where your bike is, or whatever your tracking is. It's good enough for that stuff. I wouldn't say it was great to use or easy to set up. It was average usability. A lot of this stuff is typically, if it's cheaper, it's typically made by Chinese suppliers, and Chinese suppliers, the focus is not usually on the end user product. It's usually on making money for the business. So yeah, one of the other things is there's a lot of tracking devices that are sold online, GPRS tracking and 3G and 4G tracking, where you're on a payment plan. So that was the other thing I did not want with my tracking device. I didn't want to be paying a third-party supplier for tracking. I just didn't want to be doing that. I thought if I'm going to do that, it'd have to be really good. And I've seen a lot of plans online where you can pay for tracking. Now, my feeling with these tracking devices is that these tracking devices really are designed for logistics companies tracking goods, or say a car rental company or a caravan hire company tracking caravans or tracking vehicles, because those vehicles typically are used all the time. They don't have to worry about the batteries going flat. What they can do is they can even have a switch where they can switch the thing off, or what they can do is they can put it into like a sleep mode, where it's not tracking until they need it. When they hire the car up, they can turn that mode off, they can charge the battery on the car, and they let you go, and they can track the car. So that's really what these things are made for. 99% of them are made for that. They're not made for tracking motorbikes. They're not made to run on a small battery like a motorbike, and they're not suitable for a motorbike because of that. Now, there is another type of tracker out there that I've found out about recently as well, which is far better option actually. So the other type of tracking that's far better tracking than this stuff, and is independent of your bike's battery, is what they call lot tracking. Now, lot tracking is a type of tracking device that was used, as the name suggests, to track lots of goods. So shipping container companies, for example, have been using this type of technology for a number of years, and what they do is they put a tracking device inside a container, and they can track where their goods are anywhere in the world. And that's the type of thing, that's how this lot tracking thing came about. Now, lot tracking has started to gain popularity, and there's a really good thing with lot tracking. Lot tracking does not rely on a GPRS type signal. It doesn't rely on cell phone towers. It doesn't rely on that to work. It works on its own tracking network, and that tracking network is not in every country at the moment. It is in Australia. It's available in Australia, Europe, USA, and a number of other countries. you can look online. If you look up lock tracking, you'll find it fast enough. And there's a particular company that offers that type of tracking. And there are people that are starting to build tracking devices to track personal property now. And the really good thing about lock tracking, and that's what I'll be experimenting with next if I'm going to experiment with this stuff again, is that lock tracking, you can have a tracking device, for example, that has an internal battery. And because it's not having to continually transmit its location to cell phone towers, it doesn't use hardly any power at all. In fact, the tracking is mostly done via the satellites and via the network rather than via the actual gadget itself. So it's really low power. So you can get 3 years battery life out of a tracking device. You could hide a tracking device on your motorbike and not even think about it for 2 or 3 years, and it would completely track it. And the really great part about it is you can't jam it, because it's what they call a short low frequency bursts of basically of RFID. And what happens is that each time it transmits a pulse, it's very, very short, and it's very difficult to jam. In fact, I would say at the moment that it's not possible to actually jam it. The other thing is, because of the type of transmitter that it is, you could put it inside a steel container, or you can be in an underground car park, and you can still get the reception from that type of device. So it's a much better and a much more efficient type of tracking device. But at the moment, you have to be on a plan. That's my understanding, is you'd have to be on a plan to use that type of tracking, because you need to be on this type of network. So I haven't figured out what those plans cost at the moment. I would imagine they're $30 to $50 a month or something, and probably your insurance is probably cheaper than that, so you probably just keep your insurance. So what are the options for motorbikes? I think the option is to lock your bike properly. I think that's the best option. You want to keep your bike safe, you need to be locking your bike. Invest in locks. The locks are cheaper than GPR is typically anyway. And have insurance. That's the best option. I don't think this tracking is really a good option at the moment. So what I have a couple of disc locks here, and I carry these around with me. One of them's got an alarm in it. This one's alarmed, so it'll make a racket if you move it, or if you move the bike. This one just comes back with a little tie which goes back to your handlebars, so that you can remember that you've got the thing on. These are really good. So typically what I would do is I would install this on my front wheel, and that makes it visible to a thief that you've got the lock on there. Now the problem with a front wheel lock, as I've just shown you, is that a front wheel can be removed. So a really enthusiastic thief could carry some tools, and they could take the wheel away, and it's not unheard of for that to happen. It's probably unlikely for it to happen, but it can happen. They can remove your front wheel. So the second option is to put one on the back wheel as well, which is much harder to remove. And it's easy to carry these around, so I'll put that on the back wheel, and that's now alarmed. Okay, so now that's alarmed. You've got to make sure you arm these things properly. If you don't arm it properly, it won't work. So now it's alarmed. So now if we bump the bike, that's warning us now. And the third option, and this is a good option to have as well, is to have a third lock. So if I'm getting serious and I'm going to be leaving my bike all day, then what I will do is I will take this lock, and I will put this lock through my swing arm and through my rear wheel and through something solid. So I'll park my bike by a post, something that I can lock to. So posts are typically pretty good. You usually find a post somewhere. You can't always do that, but this is another option, and it's a good option. You want to make your bike difficult to remove. You want to make it so if people have to move your bike, they've got to carry it. You don't want them to be able to wheel it anywhere easily. So the more difficult you make it, the better. And this is a rope style lock. You can buy different varying strengths of these. Now this one's reasonable. So when you put one of these types of locks on your bike, you have to go through your swing arm and through your wheel. It's not enough to go. It's not enough to lock this just through your wheel. It's just not enough. It needs to go through the frame. And the reason you want to do this is because if someone takes the time to remove your rear wheel, you want to make sure that it's locked to the frame. And if it's locked to the frame and the wheel's locked to the frame, it just makes it so much harder to take the bike. You might spend a couple of $100 on locks, maybe $300 on locks, but I think it's money well spent. I think it's worth having that spend. If you're going to be leaving your bike in the city every day and you're working in the city, you don't want your bike pinched, this is the way to do it. In your garage even, in your own house, it's worth locking your bike, because a lot of people will case neighbourhoods out. You know, you haven't got your garage door closed all the time. People come and go. They can see your bikes. They can see them locked up in your garage. You know, and they might come when you're away one day and back into your garage, back through your garage door and take your bikes, and it happens. Or they find a door unlocked or a window unlocked, and they get in the garage and they drive a ute in, and it's very easy for them to load a bike onto a ute and take off. So ideally you'd have an anchor in the ground in your garage that you can lock to, that you can lock that wire rope to, or a diamond chain, a really hardened high-grade chain. And the more deterrence you can put on the bike, the less chance there is of having the bike stolen. And I think this stuff at the end of the day is better than the trackers at the moment, unless you can get hold of those lot trackers. And the lot tracker sounds like a much better option because of the fact it can't be jammed, it doesn't use your battery, and it doesn't cause a whole bunch of problems. I think that the problem with the GPRS trackers is that is this battery usage problem. That's the main problem more than anything else. I mean, imagine if I don't ride my bike every single day, and what would happen is I would have the GPRS tracker in here, and 2 days later I go to ride my bike, oh, battery's flat, can't ride my bike, you know? That's very frustrating, very, very frustrating. I know there's some other guys that are experimenting with trackers at the moment, but I suspect that the trackers that they're using are either have internal batteries or have very small batteries and don't have much battery usage, and they're relying on the battery being plugged in all the time, or getting the power from the bike's main battery. And if that's the case, I would challenge you to try disconnecting your battery and see how long you can track your bike for, because I suspect it won't be very long at all if that's the case, and in which case it kind of semi-defeats the purpose of having the thing. So that's my take on it. That's what I think on the whole thing so far. And I will be experimenting a little bit more to see if I can solve some of these problems. And if I can, I'll come back and I'll make a further video on this, and we'll cover it some more.